Hey everyone, thanks guys for joining. Super excited to present and talk to you guys today about something I think everyone kind of experiences when you're training multiple models, you have a new project, and that's looking at, all these models. I see these top line metrics and I'm wondering, what do they mean? How do I understand how my model is actually performing? How do I potentially improve my model? What are my blind spots? And also what model I should use in production. And so my name's Corinne. I am a lead product designer here. And so I'm just going to talk through how to understand and improve model performance with some of our tooling around model evaluation. Before we get started and get into the tool itself, I'm going to actually just kind of lay a foundation for what metrics we report out. I'll talk to some different metrics for different model types, but later on in the presentation will be more focused on object detection, but just wanted to set that context. So let's do a quick review. So for our classification models, both for single label and multi-label classification, we report out this accuracy metric. And so it's pretty simple. Classification models assign, a particular label to the entire image. So there's no object or bounding box localization that needs to happen. And so we report out just the percentage of predictions that the model got correct versus the ground truth. So pretty simple for classification. For multimodal models, tongue twister, a newer model type that we have in our platform, that's where you're training on the model to have the correct text output based on the prompt and visuals that you want it to learn. We report out this metric called Perplexity. It's a little bit more of a complex metric, but it's basically just trying to measure how confidently the model predicts the next word in a sequence. The lower the number and the closer to 1 it is, the better the model will be at it. It's an interesting way that they calculate it. It's 2 to the power of the cross entropy laws, which is again super complex, but 2 to the power of 0, you can imagine, is 1. So the closer to 1, the better. The next metrics are the ones we'll be kind of focusing on more particularly, and that's for our object detection, instance segmentation, and our key port detection model types. And that's your map, precision, and recall. Starting with mAP, just as a little review, I'm sure everyone has seen mAP in our platform and has heard of it and tried to define it at least once, but it's just the average accuracy of detecting and classifying objects across all classes. And it's derived and factors in both precision and recall. So for mAP here, we actually look across all confidence thresholds and we roll that up to actually calculate mAP and mean and average that out. The at 50 is a little bit of a nuance that I'll get to a little bit later, but it is not confidence threshold. So I'll get to that in a second. Precision is how many objects that the model identified are actually the correct class. So of all things that the model predicted as container, how many of the ground truth labels are actually containers and actually that class? So for example, here, if the ground truth is the solid green lines and the predictions are the dotted green lines, the model has predicted all of these containers correctly, so the precision here is 1. Versus if there's a misclassification that occurs, the precision drops to 0.5 because the model didn't correctly see all the containers. And then additionally, if there's a false positive or an extra instance of a class detected where there's no ground truth label, that also makes the precision decline because of the fact that there's no ground truth label there and it's not actually considered a container. This might be a labeling error, but it drops precision regardless. The next one is recall. So that's actually how many real objects of the class that the model did not miss. So of all actual containers, of all ground truth labels, how many did the model accurately identify? So here, again, the recall will be 1 because the model found all of the instances of container here. If there's a missing prediction where there's a ground truth, the recall drops. And same if there's a misclassification. The interesting thing to note about recall is if there's a false positive or an extra predicted class here, it actually does not drop recall because we're just looking at and making sure that all of the ground truth boxes have a model prediction that is correct for them. So false positives do not count against recall. So when you're looking at these metrics and you're looking at precision and recall, you can optimize a little bit between precision and recall. So if you want to optimize more towards precision, You want to make sure that you're detecting objects more accurately with a high degree of confidence. Versus recall, you want to detect all possible objects or instances in that image. A really great analogy that was shared with me is if you're on an assembly line and you have like a line stopping defect, you want to be really precise with how you detect that, versus recall. If you want to detect all potential instances of a cancerous cell, you want to make sure that you're looking and seeing all of those rather than being really precise. So, an interesting example of what you want to balance between there. So, circling back to mAP, like I said, it's derived from both precision and recall. And what we do is we actually average out the precision and recall for each confidence threshold, and we plot it on this chart here, just precision versus recall at each confidence threshold. And we draw this precision recall curve. And so there'll be a curve for each confidence threshold here. And the area under the curve is just how we find mAP. So at each confidence threshold, we'll create this graph and then we'll mean that, and that'll roll up into being what your mAP score actually is. So the mAP at 50, coming back to that, is not confidence threshold because of the fact that we look across all of them. It's actually your IOU threshold is 50%. IOU sounds much more complicated than it actually is. That's just your intersection over union, aka how much box needs to overlap a ground truth label in order for it to count as the prediction for that ground truth label. So what mAP at 50 means is we're calculating mAP for making sure that whenever a prediction is at least 50% overlapping a ground truth box, that is what counts as an actual like associated prediction for that ground truth label. You'll see other instances of mAP at 75. That'll mean that the mean and average precision whenever the IRU is at 75%. So the prediction needs to be a little bit more localized to the ground truth label. And then another metric that you'll see commonly is mAP at 50 through 95. So what that actually means is at every single IOU threshold from 50% through 95%, we are looking and calculating the mAP there, and then also meaning that and rolling that up into that range. So mAP 50 to 95 is both the IOU range from 50 to 95 and all the confidence thresholds kind of rolled up into one, which is an interesting and really cool distinction. So specifically for object detection, you guys might have noticed that we've recently introduced this toggle with the label industry standard. So when you toggle that off, you see this same kind of metrics display, but there are some key differences here. These are actually externally reported model metrics from different model providers. So you'll see that the metrics might differ and the set that the metrics are evaluated against could differ as well. And so the reason that we did that is that the different model providers just have nuanced ways or different ways of actually calculating and reporting out their metrics in terms of the detections that they run against it, or the, like I said, the set that they evaluate the metrics against too. And so we wanted to make sure to kind of standardize that and allow you guys to have a more realistic way to look and evaluate your model. So this industry standard metrics standardizes across all model architectures. And then it also is a little bit more accurate to real life performance because we utilize the COCO evaluation COCO evaluation method. And we also run these metrics against the test set. So it's a little more accurate to kind of a production setting. So let's go into the actual tool set. You're able to get to the tooling via two ways. So if you are on this models page, you can get to model evaluation from your drill down here. There's a little preview of the features here, but you can also go through the versions page too whenever you have a trained model on a version. So starting off, whenever you enter this page, you're able to actually change the split that you're looking at from valid to test. We don't currently have train available here just because looking at model evaluation on the train set isn't as valuable as looking at the test set or even the valid set just because your model is trained on that. So it's a little bit more biased and inflated on that as well. So it's a little bit more important to emphasize the test set and valid set rather than the train. So let's go through each of these components and kind of talk to what they are and how to use them. This first section here, this mean average precision section, is just a report out of the way that we calculate that industry standard map. So you can see what the map actually is here. It's also powered by our supervision open source library, which I'm sure hopefully some of you have used. The also really neat thing is there are some in detail charts here that you're able to look at for your data set. So like I mentioned earlier, there's this map 50 to 95 metric. So again, looking at that IOU threshold from 50 through 95. You have your map 50 threshold, 75, and that's for all classes and all bounding boxes and detection sizes. But you can also see here there's a small, medium, and large. So this is actually looking at the size of the ground truth labels and looking at how the map changes across the board for those different sizes, right? Which I think is neat. And you're able to also filter down by class. So here, for example, you can see that platelets are a small to medium class because there's not any large ground truth labels that are, larger than that square pixel size. And then you're also able to see that the RBC class is a medium to large sized object as well. So it's really cool to gain insight into that and be able to see how your model is performing across the board there. So that's that mean average precision section. The production metrics explorer is a really cool graph that we introduced to help you guys figure out what your optimal confidence is and also figure out what kind of trade-off you want to find between precision and recall and F1. So F1 is a common score that we utilize in the field. And so it just basically is a balance between precision and recall. And what we've done is we take every single class, and every single class has the same weight in this calculation as well. So whenever you have an underrepresented class, each of them are represented across the board as a weight of 1. And so we find the precision and recall for each of those classes and roll them up here and find these percentages here. And we recommend the optimal confidence that maximizes the balance between precision and recall. This is just something that we recommend for you guys to start off, but you guys can, of course, explore what you want to optimize for. So like I said, if you want your model to be a little bit more precise, you can figure out here where you want to set your confidence threshold without, sacrificing recall too much. Or if you want to have a model that detects more, what can I go to before the precision drops off too much? So it's a really cool explorer to visualize those sorts of trade-offs and what confidence thresholds might be the best for you. So that's that production metrics explorer. The next section is a really neat one. It's the model improvement recommendation section. And we actually run this at that optimal confidence threshold. And what we wanted to do with this section is we wanted to have it be like we are giving you guys advice and trying to help diagnose what you could do for improvements on your data set based on, some analysis that we do on your model output and your data set itself. Just from what we've seen in the field, what we, commonly recommend for folks whenever they're trying to diagnose, why are there so many false negatives or what's happening with misclassification. So it's just kind of our little advice column for your particular model and data set. So for instance, we have some recommendations based on if there's a lot of false negatives for a class and what you can do in order to try to mitigate that. If it's a small object, we also have some recommendations, but we know from the map explorer that RBC is not a small object. That's also a really cool instance of how these features kind of play with one another in confluence. But we have recommendations for misclassifications and if your test set is too small, etc. So this is kind of our way of giving you guys quick tips and other things that might help out your data set and your model and improve it from there. This next section is your performance by class section. So this one is a stacked bar chart. And what it will do is it shows you the ground truth labels of each class versus the model predictions to the right in a stacked bar. So For instance, for this RBC class, you can see how many ground truth labels there are versus correct predictions, false negatives, and false positives. And you can just kind of see the proportion of like the error rate and how that actually differs between class. You could also change the confidence threshold here too. So you can see, for instance, if you wanted to test out what a 20% confidence threshold is and how that changes like the nature of your model performance, and also just diagnose what you can or should probably look at in terms of, what happens whenever I'm at a higher confidence versus lower. You can also filter by class. So for example, you can see that RBC has a lot of instances and kind of dwarfs the other classes here. So if you want to look at classes in detail, you can deselect and it'll rescale so you can see some of those stacked bar charts in detail and understand, how many instances are there for this platelet, even though there's not a lot of detections here versus RBC. The next section and the last one is your confusion matrix and your vector analysis. So the confusion matrix is kind of another repackaging of the earlier section of the performance by class, but in a different way. This is a super common and traditional machine learning visualization. So the diagonals here will be all of the correct predictions, and then everything outside of that will be incorrect or false positives or false negatives. So if there is a class above, you'll be able to see that, for instance, platelets was misclassified as WBC, and you'll be able to click on these cells and actually see these images and click on them and diagnose what's actually happening here and see potentially why that occurred and diagnose from there. You can also add tags to these images. So if I wanted to tag all the false negatives here and try to find similar images to label like these, or maybe send them back to labeling, then I can add tags and kind of do a little cleanup of my data set that way. You can also sort by worst and best F1. Again, F1 is just the balance between precision and recall. So this is actually deriving what the precision and recall on each of these images are and reporting that F1 score out. So that's your confusion matrix. And then for your vector analysis, this is actually also a really interesting tool. So what we do here is we look at your images and the embeddings of each image, aka what each image looks like and what it consists of, and we plot it on this chart. These images are not as discrete as others might be. So say, for instance, you had a data set that had daytime images and nighttime images. Those would form probably two distinct clusters because they're two distinct kinds of imagery. But here, these are all kind of microscope slides, so they all look pretty similar. But we do identify particular clusters for you guys to see the average F1 score and figure out if there's a distinct cluster of images that are not performing well for your model. So say, for instance, if there's a cluster of nighttime images that had a really poor F1 score, you would identify that the model does not do well on nighttime images, and you need to maybe train it more on those images, for example. So you can click on these and these clusters and actually see the images related to them and see them highlighted in the left. And another tip and trick that is really neat is this is actually a filter for your F1 score as well. So if you just want to see poor performing images, then you're able to filter based on that and click and drag and select these images. And something that is useful here too is even if this isn't a distinct cluster, maybe there's one class that's performing poorly here. And so what you're able to do is go through each of these images and look at maybe there's a commonality between how RBC is not found here, and is there a common way that this class looks in each of these images that is making the model not predict it. So a super cool way to utilize a vector analysis as well. You're also able to tag these in order to find more images or send them back to labeling as well. So really useful to do that as well. And yeah, those are all of our kind of in-depth overview of what our evaluation tooling is. If you're watching a recording of this and you want to join the next session live, go to roboflow.com/webinar and we'll see you there. Thanks, guys.